In an age when the sun rose with the toll of iron bells and set to the glow of fireside tales, the medieval village stood as both cradle and cage. Surrounded by endless fields and bound by unshakable faith, villagers rarely strayed beyond the land they knew. In this tight-knit realm of earth and toil, the village wasn't just a place, it was an entire world. The manor house rose above the fields like a distant god, ever watchful from its hill. The church echoed with the weight of eternity, and the village green sang daily with the bleating of sheep and the murmurs of gossip. Here, time moved to the rhythm of bells, seasons, and sacred stories passed down by firelight. Step into this forgotten world, a place where the horizon marked the edge of knowledge. Beyond the fields lay only mystery, shrouded by forest, fog, and fear. For most villagers, the world began and ended within a handful of cottages, shared soil, and familiar faces. Every life was tethered to the earth, every soul shaped by wind, rain, and ritual. The layout of these hamlets was simple, yet meaningful. A winding road threaded through the center, flanked by thatched roofs and vegetable plots. Gardens spilled into pastures, and pastures faded into woods, offering both sustenance and hidden danger. The village was placed not by chance, but with cunning caravan beside rivers or nestled in valleys, chosen for safety and survival. Life moved with a comforting predictability. At first light, villagers rose to tend their fields, planting in hopeful spring, harvesting beneath the harsh glare of autumn suns. Winter demanded its own duties, feeding livestock, mending tools by firelight, and preparing for the long, dark months ahead. Yet, amid the labor, there was joy, shared meals, market chatter, fireside laughter. These moments of kinship were the glue of survival, but isolation was a double-edged sword. It protected the village from wolves and warbands, yet also demanded fierce unity. If one family faltered, all felt the weight. Survival meant cooperation. Success was communal. Trust was not optional, it was currency. The social order mirrored the grand feudal pyramid. At the top sat the lord of the manor, ruling from his estate, his power dependent on the hands of those who toiled below. Everyone had a role. The blacksmith, whose hammer rang through the morning mist, the midwife, whose whispered words welcomed life into the world, the reeves, essential bridge between ruler and ruled, balancing fairness with fealty. That the economy was built not on coins, but on barter and trust. Grain, eggs, wool, labor, these were the currencies of daily life. Artisans were as vital as farmers. Together, they wove a fragile economy stitched together with sweat and faith. There were no schools in the modern sense. Knowledge was passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. Work was the classroom. Stories were textbooks. Elders served as walking libraries, guardians of memory, myth, and method. The few literate figures, priest or wandering scribe, were living windows to the wider world, bearing strange ideas and whispered tales from lands unseen. Belief shaped every moment. Christianity ruled the soul, but beneath the cross still stirred ancient roots. Villagers prayed in stone churches, lit candles for saints, but also feared forest spirits, whispered to sacred wells, and hung charms to ward off shadowed things that crept at night. These were lives lived in contrast, faith and folklore braided tightly into one. Survival was never guaranteed. Plagues descended without warning, claiming neighbor and kin alike. Crop failure meant hunger. War might arrive, by river or road. Each hardship required resilient steel in the spirit and softness in the heart, and yet they endured. As our journey through these forgotten lanes draws to a close, we are left with more than just the image of quaint cottages and quiet fields. We are left with echoes of struggle, of laughter, of stories whispered under starlight. The medieval village may seem small, but within its borders lived the full spectrum of human hope and hardship. Even now, its spirit lingers etched beneath the surface of our modern world. It reminds us that beneath our technology and towers lie ancient truths, that community is strength, that survival is shared, and that every village, no matter how small, holds timeless stories waiting to be remembered. And always, just above the rooftops, the manor still watches, like a massive hawk looming over its nest. The manor, whether built of cold stone or weathered timber, stood as a symbol of control. It watched everything. Tucked on the hill above the clustered cottages, it was more than architecture. It was the heart of authority, the mind of the village, and the shadow beneath which daily life unfolded. Inside, every chamber spoke with purpose. Grand halls echoed with footsteps and feast songs. Private chapels murmured divine will. The very walls carried power. Here the Lord sat in judgment, settled disputes, and shaped destinies. He was protector and oppressor, his image split between savior and tyrant. Some villagers whispered his name in gratitude, others in fear. With his retinue of armored men, he guarded the realm, yet took all he could from the soil and the souls who worked it. Life outside the manor was bound to the rhythm of sweat and soil, but within its walls, privilege was choreographed in elegance. The kitchens buzzed with cooks, preparing rich meats and foreign spices, luxuries peasants never knew. Tapestries warmed the cold stone. Hearths crackled not just with fire, but with quiet prestige. Status was inhaled here like incense from distant lands, and it was people who made this machine hum. Stewards, chamberlains, chaplains. They oversaw grain and gospel alike. Feasts were the rhythm of the manor calendar tables, arranged by rank. Every seat a reminder of your place. Beneath the elegance, feudal economics, ground on peasants, worked the lord's fields in return for protection and slivers of land. Coins were rare. Barter ruled eggs, labor, livestock, all recorded by meticulous hands to feed the manorial coffers. Justice, too, belonged to the manor. Court was held where dusty barn doors creaked open to reveal solemn stewards dispensing rulings. There was no law buccanly custom, upheld with speed and finality. Villagers often acted as jury, entrenching social bonds and reinforcing the unspoken. Order, at the center of it all, was the steward, the silent commander. He carried the weight of diplomacy, discipline, and discretion, trusted by the Lord, relied on by the people. He walked the narrow bridge between command and compassion to the peasants. The manor was paradox, a place of safety and exploitation, of protection and relentless demand. Their lives were chained to land they didn't own, their labor exchanged for security. And yet, through toil, shared meals, and seasonal celebration, a community took root, bound by duty and survival. The manor was also a cultural citadel. Here, power whispered beneath banquets, and alliances were forged with wine and whispered words. Even the peasantry felt its rich customs trickled downward, shaping fashion, farming, and belief. But time does not sit still beyond its walls. Winds began to shift. War, plague, and rebellion tested the manor's might. The Black Death hollowed its fields and filled the air with questions about wages, about fairness, about freedom. The manor system began to bend. Bonds once ironclad stretched thin. The great transformation had begun. Today, though its towers may crumble, the manor's imprint lingers. Its hierarchies echo through modern systems. Its paths are still walked, its stone still whispered to by wind. The manor is a relic hand, a warning etched deep in the story of power and community. The church, spine and soul of the village rising above the thatched roofs like a shepherd over its flock. The village church stood as both anchor and compass. Its steeple pierced the sky, reminding all that beneath heaven's eye, life was measured and watched. It was more than a place of worship. It was the village's heartbeat. Whether for a baptism, a wedding, or a final farewell, every soul passed through its doors. Beneath its arches, generations pondered life and death, heaven and earth. The church shaped time itself. Sundays called for stillness, and saints' days offered holy pauses in the cycle of labor. Bells marked the rise of morning, the toll of dusk, the rhythm of seasons. Their sound wove sky and soil together, each note a reminder of divine order. Festivals, like Easter or Michaelmas, didn't just honor the sacred, they were communal resets, moments of joy, rest, and reaffirmation. The church calendar was the village's true clock, its rhythm sacred and seasonal alike. Yet the church also held secular power. It kept records, resolved disputes, and judged moral crimes, blasphemy, adultery, betrayal. These judgments weren't just laws, they were lessons. Public penance was spectacle and warning. The priest, often the only literate man in miles, was a teacher, counselor, judge, and spiritual guide. He interpreted mysteries of faith each week before a hopeful flock, translating scripture into relevance, tradition into guidance, from property disputes to questions of salvation. His word carried weight. His sermons reached deep into daily life. Faith wasn't only practiced in pews, it was lived in motion, a sign of the cross before planting seeds, whispered blessings at births and deaths, candles lit for safety. Ritual shaped reality. Baptisms united families, marriages bonded households. Death brought the village together in solemn procession. Superstition walked beside scripture. Charms and crosses hung side by side. Sacred wells and saints were venerated in equal measure. The church didn't erase older beliefs, it absorbed and reframed them, weaving a new fabric from ancient threads, and the building itself told a story. Constructed from stone hewn by local hands, it was a monument to longing for salvation, for beauty, for permanence. Sunlight through stained glass painted biblical scenes for the illiterate, wrapping mystery in color. Peasants found solace here. Nobles found power. Both found something sacred. Economically, the church was powerful too. Tithes flowed in often, grudgingly, from every home. It owned land, worked by peasants, and its wealth fortified its authority. Yet villagers understood the church was not just tax collector, but spiritual lifeline. Its teachings shaped community, values charity, humility, faith in hard times. It shaped not just how villagers prayed, but how they lived. Even today, though stone crumbles, its spirit endures. The fields, a landscape of shared survival. Medieval agriculture wasn't just survival. It was system, memory, and cooperation. Picture a vast mosaic of narrow strips, each farmed by different hands, none held outright. This was the open field system, a patchwork of earth, shared by necessity and tradition. No single peasant owned wide land. Instead, each family tended scattered strips, bound together in a lattice of shared fate. The success of one was tethered to the success of all. Farming was synchronized to the seasons. Villagers planned together when to plow, when to sow, when to let the land rest. Crop rotation preserved fertility. No one could hoard the best soil. Even the earth enforced equality. Meetings around the village green set the plan. Early forms of democracy shaped in dirt and necessity. But disputes came, too. Straying livestock, trampled crops, failed boundaries. The village reeve, wise and stern, mediated these disputes with swift justice, holding fragile peace together. Through spring, summer, harvest, and harsh winter, labor never ceased. But it was labor wrapped in ritual, shared meals, shared stories, shared burdens. The fields taught cooperation because without it, none survived. Oxen-drawn plows carved the land as grain, seeds, barley, oats, and wheat were sown by hands, both young and aged. Each family member played their part in this annual ritual, a dance of survival passed down through generations. With summer came haymaking. Villagers, clad in wide-brimmed hats, turned open fields into drying canvases, cutting and curing grasses to sustain livestock through the bone-chilling winter months. Autumn marked the climax of this cycle. Ripe fields stood tall and golden, harvested with urgency under the watchful sky, promising sustenance through the cold, dark season ahead. Even in winter's grip, peasants labored tending livestock, repairing tools, and whispering prayers for spring's return. This cycle of toil and resilience was not random, it was wisdom in motion. Peasants ingeniously maintained soil fertility through crop rotation, alternating between grains and legumes. The fields were left to rest, grazed by livestock whose droppings served as natural fertilizer. What modern science now recognizes as ecological balance. Medieval villagers practiced by intuition and tradition. Each village had its own rhythm of rotation, a blend of practical need and inherited belief. Though rooted in superstition and communal regulation, their methods revealed a deep, if unconscious, understanding of environmental interdependence. Simple, yet vital tools shaped their world. The plow, or blend of wood and iron, drawn by oxen, was the heart of tillage, cutting into stubborn clay to reveal life-giving soil. Sickles, spades, and scythes were passed from hand to hand, their maintenance a shared responsibility. These tools were more than objects, they were lifelines, forged through necessity and used with care and reverence. Livestock were not just assets, they were companions. Cattle pulled plows, chickens provided eggs, pigs gave meat, goats milk for poorer families. A horse was a rare treasure, while other animals ensured survival in the leanest seasons. The bond between people and animals was profound. Selling or slaughtering a beloved beast marked desperation. Life was harsh, but it was not without joy. The rhythm of labor was interwoven with celebration. Feasts marked the passing season, St. Martin's Day blending Christian rites with lingering pagan traditions. These gatherings offered release, music, dance, laughter, a spiritual exhale before the next season's demands. Yet beneath the surface, pressure built. Sometimes it boiled over. Peasant revolts like the 1381 uprising in England merged from hunger, taxes, and feudal oppression. Though often crushed, these rebellions sowed seeds of change, exposing a hunger for fairness and a whisper of reform beyond the fields. Peasants crafted livelihoods through trade and skill. Idle hands turned to weaving, basket-making, leatherwork, traded for salt, tools, or debt repayment. These crafts strengthened village bonds and stitched local communities into a wider economic web. Blacksmiths, brewers, and millers became essential figures. Their workshops buzzed with labor, transforming raw harvests into tools, drink, and nourishment. Women, too, played vital roles, spinning, brewing, and managing households with enduring quiet strength. Through hardship and hierarchy, the medieval peasant lived not a life of despair, but one of tenacity. Bound by land and duty, they navigated systems with resilience, adapting to environment and tradition alike. Their plots of land, their rituals, and their tools were not merely for survival. They were symbols of community, continuity, and hope. The village green, a living heartbeat. It was the village's soul, a meeting place where daily life unfolded. It was a rare space of openness amid the structured order of feudal life. The green was never still. Its life pulsed with activity, gossip, and community. Children played, their laughter mixing with the lowing of cattle. Traders haggled in rhythmic chants. Elders shared stories, while lovers whispered beneath trees. The green united work and leisure, history and hope. On market days, the green transformed into a bustling fair. Villagers sold pottery, textiles, and produce. Traveling merchants brought foreign goods, spices, fabrics. Reputation mattered. Gossip and laughter mingled with trade, binding villagers in a web of trust. Festivals brought color and energy to the green. Music filled the air. Dancers moved in patterns passed down through generations. Pagan rites merged with Christian celebrations. Fires lit, May queens crowned each, ritual reinforcing identity and unity. The green was more than just festivity or commerce. It was a place of power and negotiation. Justice was dispensed not in courts, but in the public eye where communal wisdom, not just authority, ruled. Women, often overlooked, informal hierarchies, found influence here, spinning tales and managing reputations through conversation. The green reflected village life. Springs, energy brought planting and joy. Autumn, preparation and gratitude. Winter cloaked it in silence, only to be awakened again with spring's return. The green endured wars, plagues, and change, but remained a constant, a symbol of rootedness in a shifting world. The heart of production, mill forge, bakehouse. Structures stood as lifelines in the village: the mill, the forge, and the bakehouse. They were not mere buildings, but sacred spaces where survival was shaped and shared. The mill, often nestled beside a flowing stream, hummed with the turning of great wheels. It transformed grain into flour vital for life. The miller both respected and distrusted, stood between need and suspicion, taking a share of grain for his service and for the lord who owned the land. Close by, the forge roared with fire and industry. The blacksmith, cloaked in smoke and sweat, was both craftsman and alchemist. His hammer rang out across the village as he shaped iron into tools, nails, weapons, and horseshoes. His skill was legend essential to agriculture, defense, and daily function. Barter ruled here, payments made in goods or labor. It was a web of mutual reliance. The blacksmith's fire burned not just for utility, but for the soul of the village. In contrast, the bakehouse offered warmth and fellowship. Here, villagers came to bake bread, the symbol of sustenance and unity. The scent of fresh loaves mixed with chatter and laughter. Recipes and stories were exchanged as dough rose and crusts browned. Access to the bakehouse, like the mill, was often lord-controlled. Still, these places nurtured more than food, they sustained community. Amid restrictions, villagers found small freedoms. They bartered, adapted, innovated, a new herb in the bread. Friendships sparked beside ovens. Arguments resolved over grain sacks. In every clang of iron, every grain milled, every loaf baked, life pulsed. The villagers, though bound by duty, found dignity in craft. They were more than peasants. They were artisans, survivors, storytellers. Their world layered with hardship and harmony. Justice in the medieval village was carried out not in secret chambers, but in full view. It was a place where disputes were settled, laws enforced, and order preserved, not just for punishment, but as a vital pillar of the community. In a world where distant kingdoms ruled by parchment and decree, this court was immediate, personal, and essential. Villagers didn't just attend proceedings out of duty, they came drawn by the allure of drama. From petty arguments over broken fences to theft and slander, the court revealed the inner mechanics of rural life. Who balanced the interests of the manor with local customs? His role wasn't simply administrative, it was deeply human, informed by long-held relationships and the subtle politics of everyday life. Justice in the manor court was rarely blind. Jurors were neighbors, familiar faces who knew the families, feuds, and histories behind each case. Their judgments, while rooted in communal values, often reflected personal loyalties or long-harbored grudges. Justice here walked a delicate line between fairness and favoritism, custom, class, and the shadows of superstition. The court saw a wide range of offenses: trespassing, theft, neglect, reflecting the precarious balance of shared land and limited resources. Fines were common, often devastating for peasants barely surviving. Women were judged by strict patriarchal codes, facing punishment for being outspoken or disrespectful. Their behavior regulated both morally and socially. Beyond written laws, unspoken rules held immense power. Breaching these norms invited swift social judgments, sometimes harsher than any legal penalty. In a world where reputation was survival, one misstep could isolate a family or spark generational conflict. Class lines carved deep scars across the court's landscape. While peasants faced harsh consequences for small missteps, the nobility often evaded judgment entirely. Trials weren't always based on evidence. They could be driven by divine signs, ordeals, and fear of witchcraft. Those on society's margins, older women, outsiders, the misunderstood, were most at risk of supernatural accusation. The court, in such cases, became a stage not only for justice, but for fear, awe, and collective imagination. Punishment and reconciliation. Punishments were public and symbolic stocks. Floggings and pillories displayed offenders as living warnings. Yet the court was not always cruel. Many disputes aimed not to punish, but to restore balance. Reconciliation was often the true goal, preserving village harmony before tensions boiled over. The manor court was both stern enforcer and gentle mediator, a reflection of the village itself, resilient, complex, and shaped by forces both divine and human. Its legacy endures, not only in law books, but in our very concept of justice, as something both social and moral. The reeve, the herdsman, and the rhythm of responsibility immed the quiet strength of the village. Figures like the reeve played vital roles. A mediator between lord and laborer, the reeve managed the land, enforced order, and oversaw harvests. His authority walked a narrow path, respected, but always under scrutiny. The herdsman, by contrast, lived in near solitude, guiding flocks through pasture with silent vigilance, with crucial protecting livestock from wolves, thieves, and disease. The trust between herdsman and village was built not on words, but on necessity. The midwife held sacred knowledge passed from generation to generation, guiding women through birth and families through grief. In a world shadowed by mortality, she was more than a healer, she was a confidant. His work, etched into furrows, was the bedrock of survival. Children, bakers, and makers of the everyday world, even children, carried weighty responsibilities. Their small hands fetched water, scared birds from crops, and learned the ways of survival through action. Their games wove into work, blurring the lines between play and preparation. The baker rose before dawn to feed the village, crafting loaves that sustained both manor and field. His art was simple, yet sacred, a ritual of fire, flour, and patience that gathered villagers in shared routine. The blacksmith shaped the tools of life and defense, his forge glowing with both utility and mysticism. Sparks flew like stars, transforming raw metal into plows, hinges, and hope. The miller ever watched for honesty, ground grain into the flour that kept the village fed. His work, solitary yet central, was marked by trust and suspicion in equal measure. The carpenter turned trees into homes, halls, and hope. Every beam he carved held stories of family, protection, and perseverance. He built the skeleton of the village, one timber at a time. And finally, the telltale, the village's living archive, spun news and legend into a single thread. Through whispered stories and shared tales, memory traveled from fire to fire, stitching time together. Seasons of labor, rites of life. With the thaw of winter came spring's stirring, a time of planting and preparation. The land, divided into narrow strips, demanded collective effort. Plows creaked, oxen pulled, and voices called across awakening fields. Spring's toil was also spiritual, blessed by saints, processions, and sacred feasts. The rhythm of work echoed with prayer, uniting the village in a sacred cycle. Summers, sun brought haymaking, urgent and exacting. Grass was cut, dried, and stored to ward off winter's hunger. Storms threatened everything. Children learned by imitation. Elders watched with knowing eyes, Autumn glowed gold with harvest. The air was thick with grain, dust, and hope. Entire families joined in reaping, threshing, and storing, driven by survival's call. When barns were full, the village rejoiced. Feasts of bread, ale, and song marked the moment in the heart of the village. The tavern echoed with laughter as old men recounted stories of fields and furrows. Yet behind every chuckle lay the unspoken truth nature gave, but it could just as easily take. Each harvest was a fragile blessing. With winter came stark stillness. Colors drained from the landscape, leaving behind a world of gray. Life slowed. Families huddled inside timber homes, sealed tight against the frost. Fires flickered in hearths, their warmth the beating heart of every home. Smoke mingled with the scent of bubbling pottage. These fires didn't just offer heat, they became the center of life, places for stories, memory, and quiet reflection. Outdoor labor waned. Only the essentials remained, tending animals, repairing tools. Long winter nights stretched on. Inside, the mind turned inward. The church stood firm against the darkness, its bells marking time with a steady voice summoning hope, community, and faith through the coldest nights. The calendar of the saints offered brief, sacred reprieve. Feast days broke the monotony, calling villagers together in divine celebration. These rituals, rich in Christian symbolism, often carried echoes of older pagan rites. Yet together they wove a communal rhythm, binding souls to one another and to something higher. In this world of uncertainty, ritual was anchor, superstition, protection. Every act from planting to harvesting was steeped in meaning. Elders passed down ancient wisdom, while healers and wise women, straddling the line between fear and reverence, offered potions and charms said to mend both body and spirit. Here, saints walked beside spirits. Churches echoed with tales of old gods. The spiritual landscape was complex, blending reverence with practicality. And out of that contradiction bloomed a uniquely medieval kind of humor. Jesters and minstrels turned hardship into laughter, using wit as a balm for suffering. The village was a world alive with texture, the smell of damp earth and fire smoke, the rhythm of labor, the music of wooden wheels, animal calls, and distant bells. Every sense rooted villagers in place. Through that grounding, they found belonging. And so, despite the hardships, the village endured, changing, adapting, but always clinging to the traditions that defined it. This story of resilience, of reverence, of rootedness still echoes today, reminding us of the eternal rhythm between humanity and the earth. Then came the Black Death. In the mid-14th century, it crept into villages like a shadow. In some places, 6 out of 10 people perished. Homes stood empty, fields lay fallow. Those who survived were left to gather the pieces, shattered families, broken customs. Yet, strangely, this devastation shifted power. With so few workers left, landlords were forced to offer better terms. Peasants, once bound to the land, suddenly held leverage. The iron grip of feudalism loosened. But disease wasn't the only storm. War ravaged the countryside. Armies marched through fields, burned homes, and stole grain. Villages faced hunger, ruin, despair. Still, from ashes, they rose again, resilient, stubborn, changed. They rebuilt not just homes, but identities, stitching old traditions into new realities. Even the arrival of a new lord, could upset the fragile balance. Each brought fresh rules, taxes, and demands, often ignoring the customs of those they ruled. Yet villagers learned to adapt, preserving community through quiet defiance, ensuring their identity survived. As the centuries turned, economic winds began to shift. Markets emerged. Trade routes brushed the edges of even the most isolated hamlets. Artisans and merchants flourished. Coins began to replace barter. A slow revolution took root. Villages started to inch away from the old feudal system. Religion, once the unshakable spine of medieval life, began to change too. The church's power, though vast, was no longer absolute. Ideas of reform crept in, even to rural corners. People began to seek a more personal connection to faith. The village church, once a symbol of unquestioned authority, became a space of both devotion and debate. The very stones of the village told its story. Wars and disasters left scars, but every rebuild carried intentions. Fortified manors, stone chapels, each reconstruction whispered of survival, of a people who refused to vanish. Sanitation remained a challenge. Open sewers and contaminated wells spread disease, but even here, necessity drove change. Bit by bit, villagers learned. Wells deepened. Waste was pushed further out. A primitive form of public health began to take hold. The social order, once carved in stone, began to bend. Serfs fled to freer lands. Peasants grew bolder. A merchant class rose, bridging the gap between nobility and the poor. Women, too, began to wield influence, managing households, tending fields, running taverns and shops in times of upheaval. Village life, once shaped solely by the church bell and the plow, now pulsed with new rhythms. Trade, mobility, and community projects added color to what had once been a monochrome existence. Where survival once ruled, prosperity now peeked through the cracks. Through all the upheaval, plague, war, reform, and change, villages endured. Their names still linger on maps, their walls still stand in ruins. Their legacies woven into the land and our collective memory remind us of a time when every life was tied to soil and season. These medieval villages were more than places, they were living mirrors of the human spirit, adaptable, stubborn, and always reaching toward the light. As we close this chapter, take a moment to listen for the echoes. You may find them in your town's name, a crumbling church wall, or the shape of a field. They are reminders of those who came before us in the world. They built with bare hands and quiet faith. If you've enjoyed this journey into medieval life, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more immersive tales from history's hidden corners.